Immigration crackdown planned for Chicago. The Department of Homeland Security is now launching Operation Midway Blitz.
What happens when compassion becomes camouflage for chaos? When mercy meant to protect families turns into a shield for killers? That was Chicago in 2025, a city where the line between refuge and rebellion had vanished. Dawn broke red and cold over the South Loop as unmarked federal vans crept through alleys once declared off limits to ICE. Police radios hissed, streetlights flickered, and in the stillness of early morning, a new kind of operation began, one not of diplomacy, but of reclamation. The illusion of safety shattered overnight. Sirens echoed across the south and west sides as dawn revealed what Chicago's leaders had refused to see. The city's sanctuary shield had become its Achilles heel. By sunrise, hundreds of fugitives were in custody. The operation's precision stunned both supporters and critics. 800 high-risk offenders arrested in a single synchronized strike. Federal vans rolled through the streets silent, except for the hum of engines and the clink of steel cuffs. This was no ordinary enforcement sweep. According to Reuters, Operation Midway Blitz had been planned for months using surveillance methods once reserved for counterterrorism. ICE, FBI, and DHS agents shared encrypted real-time data tracking targets across dozens of neighborhoods. It was urban counterinsurgency, one federal strategist told Jane's Defense Weekly, a domestic battlefield mapped block by block, powered by satellite imagery and AI-driven reconnaissance. The deeper story, however, went beyond tactics. It exposed how sanctuary policies designed to shield the vulnerable had been hijacked by predators. BBC News uncovered that among those detained were cartel-linked enforcers, gang recruiters, and human traffickers operating under false identities. Defense News reported encrypted communications between Venezuelan syndicate Tren de Aragua and Mexican cartels, describing Illinois as a safe corridor for smuggling operations. In effect, Chicago's political isolation from federal enforcement had become a magnet for transnational crime. Inside the city, frustration simmered among law enforcement. The Guardian revealed leaked memos showing Chicago police officers ordered not to assist ICE even when violent felons were identified. "We knew where they were," one officer admitted, "but we were told to stand down." That silence cost lives. Globally, analysts drew grim comparisons. DW noted that Europe's lenient sanctuary zones had similarly been exploited by extremist cells, while Al Jazeera pointed to Asia's zones of tolerance in China, areas where limited enforcement created power vacuums quickly filled by organized actors. The message was universal hesitation breeds infiltration. The clash between local defiance and federal power wasn't just legal, it was existential. To Washington, sanctuary laws represented a direct challenge to the Constitution's supremacy clause. No city can nullify national law, President Trump stated during a live address, not while criminals walk free under its flag. But to sanctuary advocates, the raids felt like an invasion. Protesters flooded Daley Plaza, carrying signs that read, "No raids in our city." The moral debate had reached a fever pitch. Was America sacrificing its humanity for security or reclaiming order from chaos? Analysts from Jane's Defense Weekly described the standoff as a domestic version of NATO's command dilemma, divided authority in the face of a common threat. When cities become fortresses against their own government, the chain of command fractures, and with it the illusion of unity. Operation Midway Blitz was no longer just an ICE mission. It had become a constitutional showdown, a question of sovereignty inside America's own borders. And as federal convoys disappeared into the horizon, another question lingered: when mercy blinds justice, does compassion still save lives or merely bury them? Under President Donald Trump's direct order, the federal government launched Operation Midway Blitz, a multi-agency campaign to reclaim Chicago from its own defiance. What had started years earlier as a sanctuary policy, a moral stand against federal immigration enforcement, had metastasized into an underground network shielding more than 800 fugitives, killers, child predators, and cartel affiliates. Compassion had mutated into protection for predators. Her name was Katie Abraham, and her death turned policy into tragedy. She was 26, a nursing student, driving home after a late hospital shift when a red light turned green and a speeding SUV slammed into her car. The driver fled. He was drunk, undocumented, and already wanted for multiple prior offenses. His name, Julio Kukul Ball. Protected by Chicago's sanctuary laws, he'd been released twice despite ICE detainers. Katie died instantly. The city's silence had killed her as surely as his hands. The story struck the nation like lightning. Reuters confirmed that local police had identified Kukul Ball months earlier, but were barred by state law from notifying federal authorities. BBC News replayed the haunting footage of Katie's wreckage across primetime screens. Compassion, once Chicago's pride, had become its curse. When Operation Midway Blitz was announced, officials dedicated it to Katie's memory. ICE Director Tricia McLaughlin stood before reporters, her voice steady. "Every arrest we make under this operation is one less Katie." The words resonated beyond politics. The Guardian described the moment as a moral inversion when justice finally spoke louder than ideology. Federal investigators traced the systemic failure to the city's sanctuary framework. DW revealed that Illinois law had effectively erected legal walls around local departments forbidding coordination with ICE even after violent crimes. The result, a revolving door for repeat offenders. The same pattern DW noted had already crippled parts of Germany where asylum laws shielded dangerous individuals from deportation. The lesson was global, and brutal laws written for mercy can become tools of impunity. In Washington, the Abraham case hardened resolve. President Donald Trump convened an emergency DHS briefing invoking Article 6, the Supremacy Clause, declaring that no state or city could obstruct federal law in matters of national security. Sanctuary ends, he said, where sovereignty begins. Defense News reported that the administration reclassified sanctuary obstruction as a counterintelligence concern, equating it to interference with counter-terror operations. Strategic parallels emerged worldwide. Al Jazeera compared the sanctuary loophole to weak jurisdictions in Ukraine before the Russian invasion, when fragmented command allowed hostile networks to thrive. The Guardian linked it to Hezbollah's rise in Lebanon, where blurred governance birthed parallel power structures. Everywhere, hesitation fed chaos. For Chicago, the reckoning was intimate. Katie's parents stood outside City Hall clutching candles as snow fell. "We believed in compassion," her mother said to BBC News, "but compassion without accountability is cruelty." Their grief transformed into momentum. Across the Midwest, public opinion shifted. Polls showed rising support for federal enforcement even among previous sanctuary advocates. Meanwhile, protests surged outside ICE facilities, torn between mourning and rage. Some chanted for justice, others for mercy, but as the candles flickered, one truth emerged in the cold: no slogan could undo the cost of silence. Katie's name became more than a memory. It became a warning carved into policy debates from Chicago to Washington. When law yields to sentiment, innocence becomes collateral. Can a nation claim moral virtue if its mercy leaves its own citizens defenseless? Reuters and BBC News investigations exposed how Illinois' 2021 law banning local cooperation with ICE created what officials later called an enforcement blackout. Detainers went ignored. Federal alerts were buried under paperwork. Murder suspects walked free under city protection. "We built a fortress for fugitives," one former Chicago officer told The Guardian, and called it compassion. At exactly 5:30 a.m., the storm began. Helicopters skimmed the skyline as tactical convoys rolled through Chicago's sleeping streets. From Pilsen to Englewood, steel doors shattered under precision-breaching charges. Radios crackled, commands echoed, and for the first time in years, the federal government moved with total unity inside a city that had long defied it. Operation Midway Blitz was live. According to Reuters, more than 400 agents from ICE, FBI, DHS, ATF, and U.S. Marshals launched simultaneous raids across 22 locations. Every target had been pre-verified through a cross-agency database. No random arrests, no confusion, just names drawn from the worst of the worst. Murderers, traffickers, and cartel operatives hidden under the label of asylum seekers. Defense News confirmed that the operation's coordination mirrored precision strike doctrines used in counter-terror missions abroad. Agents relied on real-time satellite imagery, encrypted drone feeds, and AI-assisted tracking borrowed from U.S. military systems. Analysts at Jane's Defense Weekly dubbed it urban interdiction, a hybrid between police action and battlefield logistics. In effect, Chicago had become a domestic theater of asymmetric warfare. The results were staggering. Within 3 hours, 800 fugitives were in custody. Weapons caches were seized, safe houses dismantled, and millions in criminal proceeds frozen. BBC News cameras captured the aftermath rows of detainees lined along federal vans under dawn's gray light. The city's sanctuary veil had been ripped apart, exposing what lay beneath a network of violence protected by bureaucracy. But not everyone cheered. As the convoys rolled out, protesters filled the streets near ICE's Broadview facility. They carried signs reading "Sanctuary saves lives" and "Stop the raids." The Guardian reported that some demonstrators hurled bottles at federal vehicles while others knelt in prayer. The moral fracture was complete, a nation split between those who saw justice restored and those who saw freedom betrayed. Inside the White House, President Donald Trump addressed the nation. His tone was cold, measured, unflinching. No city, no governor, no ideology stands above the law, he declared from the Rose Garden. America's compassion is not a loophole for criminals. It is a promise to protect the innocent. His statement broadcast globally redefined sanctuary not as a virtue but as a vulnerability. DW commentators compared Midway Blitz to Europe's post-terror operations, where domestic leniency gave way to decisive enforcement. Israel's security official speaking to The Guardian described it as a necessary correction of hesitation. Even Beijing's state-controlled outlets, noted by Al Jazeera, warned that the United States is rediscovering discipline through confrontation. On the ground, agents described the mission not as vengeance, but as restoration. Years of being handcuffed by policy had finally given way to clarity, yet beneath the operational triumph lay an uncomfortable truth. If it took a near military operation to enforce basic law, what did that reveal about the state of America's unity? By midday, the skies cleared. Chicago's skyline glimmered, but its conscience trembled. Sanctuary had been exposed for what it had become, a sanctuary not for the weak, but for the wicked. And as the last helicopter lifted over the city, one haunting question hung in the air. Had America just saved Chicago or proven how close it had come to losing itself? By 2024, cartel intelligence units had taken notice. According to Jane's Defense Weekly, Mexican and Venezuelan networks exploited Chicago's legal sanctuary the same way insurgents exploited ceasefires in Iraq as breathing room to regroup. Defense News confirmed encrypted cartel chatter describing Illinois as a cold zone, low risk, high reward. The city had become a strategic hub, not for refugees, but for organized crime. What the raids uncovered was far darker than anyone imagined. Beneath Chicago's skyline lay a web of transnational crime, a fusion of cartels, Venezuelan syndicates, and global financiers operating with the precision of a covert army. Reuters reported that agents found hidden ledgers, fake construction permits, and encrypted digital trails linking the city's sanctuary zones to operations in Maracaibo, Mexico City, and Madrid. This wasn't chaos, it was strategy. The Venezuelan syndicate Tren de Aragua, according to Al Jazeera, had quietly established logistics hubs in Chicago's suburbs. Construction companies doubled as front operations for human trafficking and weapons storage. Nightclubs near O'Hare served as laundering points for cartel cash. These groups had studied America's political divisions and turned them into tactical advantages. They knew exactly where law enforcement's hands were tied. Defense News revealed intercepted communications confirming that the sanctuary policies themselves were referenced in cartel briefings as political shields. Criminals used local legal protections as camouflage, moving narcotics and money under the guise of refugee transport. Agents later found cryptocurrency wallets holding millions of transactions routed through digital nodes in Europe and Asia. DW described it as the globalization of criminal sovereignty. The scope stunned even veteran investigators. The FBI's Financial Forensics Unit uncovered over $2.7 million routed through fake community centers, each acting as a laundering channel for human smuggling profits. Jane's Defense Weekly analyst compared the setup to insurgent funding models in Iraq's civilian fronts, masking militant finance. Chicago had unwittingly become a logistics base in a global shadow war. What began as an immigration policy had evolved into a hybrid warfare network. The blurred line between humanitarian intent and criminal exploitation mirrored patterns seen across conflict zones. In Ukraine, weak border enforcement had allowed Russian mercenaries to slip through under civilian aid covers. In Lebanon, Hezbollah used refugee networks to move weapons. And now in the United States, organized crime had weaponized compassion itself. The Guardian noted that these revelations forced a reckoning in Washington. The U.S. intelligence community began to treat sanctuary jurisdictions not as social experiments, but as potential national security vulnerabilities. Cyber Command initiated a probe into digital laundering patterns, suspecting ties between cartel cryptocurrencies and foreign intelligence proxies. For ordinary citizens, the consequences were personal and haunting. Families who once believed in sanctuary as moral refuge now saw it as betrayal. "We opened our doors," one Chicago mother told BBC News, "and the monsters walked in." Globally, strategists warned this was only the beginning. From Berlin to Tel Aviv, security analysts saw the same trend, organized crime thriving where politics faltered. DW called it the quiet invasion of legality, a war fought not with bombs, but with paperwork networks and hesitation. As ICE buses carried the detainees away, the city stood eerily silent. For once, there were no slogans, no chants, only the hum of engines and the quiet recognition that something much larger had been exposed. When law becomes porous and mercy becomes predictable, enemies don't need to break in, they simply walk through the open gate. The political aftershocks came faster than the raids themselves. Chicago's mayor condemned Operation Midway Blitz as a gross violation of local autonomy, calling the arrests federal overreach under the guise of security. But the numbers spoke louder than rhetoric. According to Reuters, over 800 violent offenders were detained, 92 firearms seized, and 5 major gang networks dismantled within 48 hours. The illusion of moral high ground crumbled beneath statistical reality. Globally, the warning signs were identical. DW reported similar zones of hesitation in parts of Germany and France, where humanitarian intent created lawless enclaves exploited by traffickers and extremists. Israel's security officials, quoted by The Guardian, called it a textbook infiltration pattern. The enemy hides where law hesitates. Crowds surged into the streets, some in anger, some in relief. Outside federal buildings, protesters waved banners reading "No deportations, no raids," while across town, victims' families held vigils with signs that read, "Justice for Katie." BBC News described it as a city split between conscience and consequence. In Washington, President Donald Trump convened an emergency national security briefing. Defense News confirmed that DHS, DOJ, and ICE received orders to conduct federal audits of every sanctuary jurisdiction in the country. The tone was decisive. Cities obstructing federal enforcement would now be treated as national security risks, not political dissenters. No state shall stand apart from the law, Trump declared. America's unity is its defense. The international response was as revealing as the operation itself. DW reported cautious approval from European intelligence officials who saw echoes of Germany's 2015 refugee crisis, where humanitarian policy overwhelmed internal control. In Israel, security analysts told The Guardian that Chicago's crackdown reflected a necessary evolution from compassion to accountability. Meanwhile, Al Jazeera warned that America's internal fractures mirror the instability it once fought abroad, citing parallels with NATO's disunity in Europe and Lebanon's governance under militia shadow. Within U.S. intelligence, the findings from Midway Blitz triggered deeper alarm. Jane's Defense Weekly revealed that some arrested operatives maintained encrypted contact with servers in Eastern Europe, the same digital corridors used by cyber espionage groups linked to hostile states. It was no longer just about fugitives or gangs. America's internal leniency had become a gateway for hybrid warfare. For Chicago's citizens, the aftermath carried both relief and reflection. The Abrahams, now the symbolic face of reform, stood before cameras outside the federal courthouse. "We didn't want vengeance. Katie's father said we wanted responsibility." His words resonated in city halls across the nation. Sanctuary, once seen as moral courage, now looked like moral confusion. Yet amid victory, unease lingered. The raids had reasserted federal dominance, but at a cost. DW commentators questioned whether America had crossed from protection into militarization. If compassion required force to defend, had the nation preserved its ideals or surrendered them? President Trump's closing statement answered that doubt with defiance. Standing before a sea of reporters, he declared, "Compassion without control is chaos. America will never apologize for defending its people." The line became both declaration and warning, a reminder that unity demands discipline and sovereignty demands resolve. Globally, The Guardian called Midway Blitz a constitutional thunderclap heard from Berlin to Beijing. It redrew the definition of sanctuary, rebalanced the relationship between morality and enforcement, and reignited the oldest democratic question of all. When law bends to mercy, how long before it breaks entirely? In Washington, patience finally snapped. President Trump's National Security Council classified sanctuary obstruction as a domestic sovereignty threat. His administration framed the crisis not as an immigration debate, but as a test of national unity, whether federal law still held supremacy within America's borders. At 5 a.m. Midway, Blitz was greenlit. Federal agents moved like phantoms through the frost. Their mission was clear: restore federal authority, dismantle the sanctuary pipeline, and send a message that no city stands above the law. But as the first doors splintered under battering rams, one question echoed through the silence: had America's compassion become its greatest vulnerability? If justice can be suspended in the name of mercy, who decides when mercy ends and anarchy begins?